There are well over 30 challenges found in Skylanders Spyro's Adventure, and so naturally some of these heroic challenges come tougher than others, and that's exactly what we're going to be counting down in today's top 10 video. None other than the top 10 hardest Skylanders Spyro's Adventure heroic challenges. Now please take note of the title there, Spyro's Adventure being named specifically because we're only going to be looking at those 32 based heroic challenges. We're not going to take into consideration the additional 16 you can get from Giants. This is Spyro's Adventure only. But now after emphasis put out of the way, I want to make it clear that there isn't really many heroic challenges in Spyro's Adventure that I would consider all that tough. So long as you're competent and decent at the game, you're not going to struggle with very many of them. So a lot of them being included in this list are an absolute stretch. It just so happens that the 10 on this list are the 10 hardest most in the game, but it doesn't mean that them in and of themselves are difficult heroic challenges. So now, with all of those key things out of the way, of course, what contributes to making a heroic challenge as tough as it is the setup itself. The setting can sometimes contribute to how difficult it is. For mystery behind the actual layout of the level can help increase the difficulty, you can go as far to say. On top of that, there's also the difficulty found in how much damage you can take from enemies or hazards, and you know, whether your movement speed will make things a lot harder or whatnot. Will slower Skylanders struggle more at this challenge? Because I want it to be noted that if certain Skylander gameplay styles are going to struggle with a challenge more so than other gameplay styles of other Skylanders, then that will also contribute to just what makes the heroic challenge as tough as it is. But clearly enough of this has been said and done. Let's roll the intro and get into the top 10 without further ado. But before we get into the list itself, let me give you a few tough honourable mentions. Dinorang's heroic challenge becomes very tough if you're not an Earth-based Skylander, because if you're slow and can't mine away at the rocks, then getting to these thieves are going to be all the more difficult for you, because you have to loop back around rather than destroy the rocks to take a more faster shortcut based route. And on top of that, the thieves themselves can be very challenging to chase down, especially with slow Skylanders can't emphasize this enough. And it does have a tight timer, even though there's definitely a lot of time to spare. It's just tighter than the regular heroic challenge, which is why it's made the honourable mention slot of the bare minimum. It's just easy enough, especially since the thieves with clever timing and strategy can be dealt with quite easily, and there's not too many of them that you have to worry about. I think there's only 6 or 8 to round up, so naturally it most certainly isn't the hardest heroic challenge, and that's what lands Drobot, Dinorang even nothing more than a honourable mention. But moving on to Whamshell, with his heroic challenge, it gives you a huge advantage if you're a water Skylander, because you can traverse the water and find additional charms, as well as take a more efficient route to acquire the charms. But even when you're not a water Skylander, you can still traverse around the level quickly enough. The timer is not nearly tight enough in order to create for a slower route, being nigh impossible to acquire all of the charms for. So Whamshell's, even without the advantages, still fairly easy, even if it is a fine example of certain Skylanders being more equipped to the challenge. So if you wanted a tougher time, you don't place a water Skylander or a flying Skylander onto the portal, just any Skylander that can traverse water, I mean by all of that. That's how you make the challenge a little bit more difficult for yourself. But even then, you're not going to find yourself at the helm of an impossible task, making Whamshell nothing more than an honourable mention. And our final honourable mention is Double Trouble, who has the setup for a tough heroic challenge, that's for sure. You even get the little warning in the description itself. but it doesn't really live up to that, considering that all of the paintings and the vases that you lose time for are so scarcely placed, and it's so easy to maneuver around them and defeat the enemies. The timer is not nearly tight enough as well, it's far too generous, and all of these factors in combination with one another makes Double Trouble's heroic challenge when compared to others tough for sure, but not nearly as tough as for 10 coming up on the list right here. So without further ado, let's get into it. For number 10, we got Igniter right here. Of course, one of the toughest Skylanders has one of the toughest heroic challenges. Now, the problem with this one falls down to your character's movement speed. If you have a really fast Skylander, then this is going to be no problem for you whatsoever, because what you've got to do is mine away rocks to find some keys, but these keys are randomly placed, so you can't always, re-attempt a mission if you fail at knowing where the keys are, because they would have completely changed their position. That's exactly what random means, mind you. But regardless from all that, if you have a slow movement speed, you're going to struggle to get around to pick out all of the rocks, because you practically need to pick out all of them, and sometimes you miss them because they blend in with the rest of the stage in which this mission is set. So that alone makes things harder in terms of you actually noticing where the rocks are that you need to mine away. And on top of that, there are hordes upon hordes of rhubarbs and rhubabies, so they can really get in your way and mess you up, especially if they start swarming you and dealing far too much damage and start overwhelming you and all. So naturally, it's a blend of having so many rhubarbs and rhubabies swarming you to help add to this challenge, and on top of that, you of course have a random placement of the keys, and the fact that you need to find your way around for mine and hope that you don't miss any rocks to mine down. And so that alone, combined with a tight timer, is all what leads to making Igniter's heroic challenge so tough. For number 9, we have Stump Smash, which could be conceived as yet another defeat 100 enemies mission, but it's so much more hard than that, since the areas are really tight and there are hordes upon hordes of chompies that can easily overwhelm you in the same way that the rhubarbs and rhubabies can for Igniter's challenge. And on top of that, the timer is really tight, and sometimes chompies can kind of hide and sneak away from you, and it's crucial to hit every single one you can because they are incredibly scarce and limited. So the tight timer combined with the fact that you might miss a few chompies can mean that you struggle to defeat them all, and on top of that, as I said earlier, with slow movement speed and the fact that chompies swarm you, you can be in for a bit of a tough time as you walk slowly. First of all, that makes the timer more tight, to say the least, and then on top of that, if the chompies swarm you, you're at risk of being defeated by them, and that is the true tragedy of a heroic challenge, mind you. Coming in at number 8, we have Chop Chop, whose timer for the heroic quest is an absolute joke, since you get about 4.5 minutes, which is way too much for what you're trying to do. So whilst that doesn't make the challenge hard, what does make it hard on the other hand, and what can make the timer a little bit tight if you're really stretching it, is the fact that for Chop Chop's quest, you need to navigate a map full of little bouncy type plants. I'm not even sure what their official names are, but regardless of what they're called, they give you huge knockback, and sometimes this means you can be knocked back and forth constantly between a bunch of plants since they're placed so close together, and that can be a huge time waste. It can make you really struggle, and on top of that, if you're playing a melee character, it's effectively impossible to get past for little spiky explosive plants that deal damage to you. So sometimes if you get knocked back enough, then you can take far too much damage from those pods, and that doesn't help when you have a Skylander with low health, perhaps like Boomer for example. So naturally, whilst this is most certainly not a difficult heroic challenge, I won't say any of these lists, any on this list are particularly impossible. This one just so happens to be amongst the harder crowd, giving it a worthy number 8 inclusion on the list right here. But coming in at number 7, we have Wrecking Ball. I never thought Wrecking Ball would get on one of these lists right here, but here we are with this heroic challenge where you need to collect 75 charms with a really tight timer. If you don't pick up the key, then you're likely not going to clutch this out. So for slow Skylanders, you are really going to struggle here, especially with the terrible bounce pad physics. You know, sometimes you'll get frustrated that you left a charm behind, so you'll keep on bouncing up and down for it, and of course for more you bounce up and down, for more time you wind up wasting, and on top of that it's so easy to lose control and wind up in the water where Skylanders who can't fly or swim just fall in and get respawned several seconds later. So overall there are just small things that can build up to a huge waste of time, and if you don't know the map, going into it completely blind makes the challenge even more tougher because you don't know where the key is and you can't clutch it out. And even when I knew where the key was with a slower Skylander, I actually struggled to get to the key gate in time even. So yes, definitely a much more tighter timer than those challenges preceding it. If they shaved off 30 seconds, then this could have easily been one of the top most hardest rope challenges in the game. Coming in at number 6, we have Slam Bam. Now what's so cool about Slam Bam's challenge is that it demands concentration. If you go into it all willy-nilly and not really focus in the moment, and you are going to lose, because there's areas where you can softlock yourself if you're idiotic enough and don't use any brain cells. So the fact that first of all you need to have some sort of intelligence as to how you tackle this quest makes it tougher than the others. But on top of that, and for soft locks and all that make you have to restart the challenge, if you accidentally hit a larger barrel and then swap out your colour before you've explored the area a little and defeated or destroyed even all of the barrels of your same colour beforehand, and you're going to wind up being completely unable to destroy certain barrels, and that's going to put you in a really hard position moving forward, especially with slower Skylanders. So naturally this challenge is just simply tough because of the fact that if you're not logical and smart about it, you can softlock yourself or you can leave several barrels left undestroyed, and that just makes the time even more tighter, so you have to traverse and explore the area even more than what you would regularly, making this a rather difficult challenge indeed. Number 5, we have Lightning Rod, whose challenge is all about defeating enemies, and then, well, after you've defeated a horde of enemies, you find yourself needing to teleport, and sometimes there are 2 teleport paths rather than 1, and sometimes they lead you to a trap, and then after you're done off a trap you need to teleport back and select the right teleporter this time around. So naturally, with just how many enemies hoard you and the fact that they are very difficult enemies to defeat and they take you a while, can make the timer extremely tight, and the horde of enemies alone can be quite tough to deal with, and they overwhelm you just like they did with Stump Smashers and Igniter's challenge. And on top of that, the ending is extremely confusing. I still haven't quite understood it to this day. Like, sometimes it glitches out and it can be a rather big nuisance, the fact that you don't end it off in the same kind of structure as leading up to it, because you don't teleport to finish it off, you just need to head towards the light. So yes, it's a rather strange challenge. It's difficult to wrap your head around, and simple mistakes can lose you so much time to where the timer becomes far too tight and you wind up failing the challenge because of it, making Lightning Rods one of the tougher challenges in the game. It's like Trick Happy's but on steroids, since its timer is a lot more tight and its enemies are a lot more harder. But next up is going to be Stealth Elves. Now what's so difficult about her challenge is that there's mines everywhere. You can wind up, if you go into things too fast and too careless, bouncing between mines and taking 300 damage with a snap of one's fingers. So this is just about the only challenge where I will admit you can actually die on. You know, these challenges aren't tough enough to where your Skylander might run out of health, but with Stealth Elves, that's basically the exception. And you need speed, for challenge demands speed because of a tight timer, but you can't always be so quick due to the mines being scattered everywhere so randomly, in fact, and sometimes you even need to destroy barrels in order to get around minefields. It's a rather cleverly designed challenge, and it's just one that demands your full concentration, just like Slam Bam's. If you turn your brain off just for a second, you're gonna wind up getting yourself killed, which it just adds to the toughness of a challenge because it demands more brain cells than the rest of them, so to say. There is a few cheats that you can do, however, like at the very end you can just sneak past the minefield to get to the final MacGuffin you need to beat the challenge with. I'm not even sure what it's called, but we're just going to stick with MacGuffin because that's descriptive enough. So the fact that the challenge can be cheese is what makes it slightly easier, and outside of the mines you're not going to find much challenge in this level. So naturally that's gives Stealth Elf with number 4 spot. Receiving our 3rd place spot is a rather tough Skylander in the form of Bash, so it's only fitting that he gets a tough heroic challenge in the same vein as Igniter because it has the same setting and you need to also mine in this instance. Naturally, for mining doesn't come easy because the rocks blend into the background, as I mentioned previously, again with Igniter. But the problem with Bash is that you need to collect these purple crystals, which are randomly placed. So once again, being knowledgeable doesn't even help here, because you might fail a challenge once and have to go through it all over again. But if you directly go out of your way to go to the same rock that a crystal was at beforehand, you're not going to find that crystal there again because they were randomly placed. So that makes things difficult right off the bat. The rocks are really spread out and camouflage, so you're going to need a quick scanner in order to traverse the terrain quickly. Otherwise, you're not going to reach for rocks in time, and the time is going to become rather quite tight with a low movement speed. So naturally, there's just a lot of things that contribute to making this challenge a lot more harder than Igniter's. A tighter time limit, a random placement of purple crystal geodes, which Igniter had the same problem with the keys, how they were randomly placed. And Igniter did have a swarming enemy, sure, but Bash just has a tighter timer, and the fact that the rocks are placed in even harder places to get your hands on. Igniters are kind of clustered, so if you find one rock, you can really find all of them, but Bash just isn't the case. For more spread out challenges, for more tight the timer becomes when you start mining where you expect them to be even, and then they're not there, so that can be a huge time waste and can really put you off. Number 2 is Zap, which is basically Double Trouble's heroic quest on steroids, because the problem with Double Trouble's quest is that it certainly could have been harder for one, for the fact the timer was so generous, and the paintings and the vases are so easy to maneuver, and they're so infrequent that you could destroy all of them and still manage to beat the challenge just fine. But with Zaps on the other hand, the vases are everywhere. If you're playing this projectile character, one projectile too many and trying to defeat the enemies will wind up hitting bases. You lose 10 seconds for each one. So sometimes lingering fire damage, like say if we were to bring out Igniter's Fire Spirit, can defeat several of them, losing 40 seconds right off the bat. The cats are really difficultly placed. You have to be very slow and cautious when destroying them, which can, once again, contribute to making the timer rather quite tight. So for sheer abundance of enemies, as well as for sheer abundance of vases that can eliminate your time significantly, is what makes this challenge so overwhelming and difficult to complete, much more so than that of Double Troubles, which is an absolute joke calling it a tough heroic challenge. However, Zap, his description lives up to the tough one in my view. But number 1, without a shadow of a doubt, is going to be Drobot, fitting how the toughest Skylander of them all also has the toughest heroic challenge, because with his, you need to defeat 100 green chompies without defeating more than one purple chompy, which is far easier said than done. Sometimes there are traps to where you can go around a corner and all you'll find is purple chompies and no green chompies, and they can attack you, you just can't attack them, so that can cause you to be swarmed and hoarded and just lose a lot of health because of that. And then also a lot of green chompies are blended in with a lot of purple chompies, so sometimes you'll hit purple chompies by mistake and just be overwhelmed by the sheer abundance of chompies available. So naturally you hit purple chompies far too easily, which is what contributes to the challenge being so tough. And then there are certain Skylanders which have lingering fire damage, again leading back to Igniter's Fire Spirit. Or say trigger happy whenever you lob something. You might lob something at a green chompy, but then the coin explosion afterwards can defeat all of the purple chompies in the vicinity. Ghost Roaster is the absolute worst, because whenever you defeat a chompy, it leaves behind a ghost which can attack all of the other chompies around it, including that of the purple ones. So for some Skylanders, based on their specific moveset, this heroic challenge is next to impossible. How can you say it's anything but the toughest? And the fact that there's a call for 100 green chompies and there's barely 100 green chompies available just adds to that difficulty, because sometimes you're going to find yourself struggling to even find the green chompies, since they aren't exactly in abundance in this level. I found myself at 97 green chompies and then having to look around and scamper for the final 3, which I had to very slowly, killfully defeat. Or skillfully even, not killfully, but regardless, I had to slowly navigate around the purple chompies and ensure I didn't hit him accidentally, which is far easily said and done. It happens more frequently than you'd expect. And so naturally, that combined with a tight timer is just what makes Drobot's heroic challenge without a shadow of a doubt the hardest Spyro's Adventure had to offer, giving it a worthy #1 inclusion on the list. And with that all being said and done, that means this top 10 is indeed coming to an end. So I want to thank you guys so much as always for watching, and I will of course be seeing you in the next one. But until the moment arises, peace.